start the meeting.
Excellent. Good morning. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the meeting page of the Council website. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the board who have video cameras to keep their video cameras switched on and keep their microphones muted except when speaking. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the usual way. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should use the raise hand function in Zoom and then unmute and ask your question. I would ask for your patience if we run into technical problems, and should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Members, I will begin the meeting with a roll call to establish who is present. When I call out your name, please confirm by unmuting your microphone and stating that you are present. Val Lim.
Yes.
Thank you, Val. Martin.
Present.
Thank you very much. Barry.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor King appears not to be with us. Councillor Slatter.
Present.
And myself, Dennis Payne. Rhiannon, are there any apologies for absence?
No, so I will have a look at where Councillor King is at the moment, but fortunately we are quorum, so we can go ahead with the meeting.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable interests? I will take that as a no. I'd like to move on then to the minutes of the meeting of the 5th of November. And we're being asked to approve these as a correct record. Does anybody have any questions or issues with those minutes?
Dennis, I have a few actually. I'm sorry.
Fine.
Okay. On page 5, item 12 says minutes of the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Committee, 30th of September 2021. Surely those should be the meeting of the 5th of November, should it not?
I'll have a look into that if and change it if that's needs to be done.
Sorry, is that not referring to the previous minutes that were discussed at the meeting of the 5th of November?
But then it goes on to forward gender plan. So it's in large font and it says minutes of the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Committee, 30th of September 2021. The minutes of the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund were noted. Surely that the large text should be in reference to the meeting, our meeting on the 5th of November.
No, Val, I think that's the minutes for the Cambridge Committee that you noted as a board. I think that is right.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I would have. I mean, this meeting itself was on the 5th.
Yeah, sorry. So the meeting date is at the top of the minutes. And then there were a couple of items which looked at previous meeting minutes. The first one was item 11, which was the previous LPB minutes. And then below that, it looked at the previous pension committee minutes. I think there's in the same way that today you're looking as item 3 at the pension committee minutes of the 13th of December.
Right. Okay. So apologies for that.
No problems.
We put a typo like that later, but not this one.
And item 14. It talked about the sentence begins: the frequency of pension overpayments in the Cambridgeshire Fund was not systemic. Northamptonshire used the same process but had fewer IDRPs. Why is Northamptonshire relevant in our minutes?
I think we discussed that though, didn't we? So we compared it with Northamptonshire, so it was fair.
If it's a record of the meeting and the matter was discussed, then it's appropriate it's in the minutes.
Okay, all right, apologies.
No, that Val, I mean, it was simply that we have the same processes for both funds, and we had no IDRPs for Northamptonshire, yet we had some for Cambridgeshire, and that's why we didn't feel there was a systemic issue. It's just a bit unlucky that they all had been Cambridgeshire. Bear in mind, it was the same processes.
Okay, and page 9, item 20, I think the word it needs to be, it was resolved.
Yes, rather than resold.
Yes.
Yeah, I can change that. Fine.
And that's it. Apologies for misunderstanding some of the others.
That's good. Good spot on the item 20.
Are there any other matters on those? If none, I will take it that the recommendation to approve the minutes with that one typo correction will be carried. And I will sign a hard copy sometime, I think. I think I probably need to catch up with signatures at some point. So, Rhiannon, can we agree how I'm going to do that, please?
There isn't a deadline for which you need to catch up with signatures, but when it's pertinent to do so, that can be the next time we meet in person, or if there is a backlog and you get significantly concerned, we can post them to you. But
okay, fine. You and I can sort that. Okay, moving on. There is an action log. Does anybody have any questions on that action log? Looks like a stunned silence, so we will take that as noted. Thank you to the officers who prepared that. We now have the minutes of the Pension Fund Committee for information. Does anybody have any questions on these minutes? Again,
I have my hand up.
I'm sorry.
I don't think you can see the indicating hand, can you?
It's the absolute top leftmost item on my screen, and I apologise, Councillor Slatter. Over to you.
Well, if it's not seen as a terrible breach of protocol, I can always chip in like I've just done. Thank you. Yes, clearly one of the things discussed was under public questions. And And I've not been able to discuss, probably would be inappropriate to discuss this with any members of the committee, but the committee don't appear to have made any sort of resolution about bringing this to our attention or having any oversight. And I would really appreciate officers' ruling on this, because clearly there's a great concern amongst our pensioners as well as the general public. And it would be good to have the issue of decarbonising investments properly discussed somewhere appropriate. I'd be pleased to hear what you think. I've obviously read the officer's response, and I am a member of the county council. So some of this is being done in my name, and I wonder if I should be raising it anywhere else in the structure.
Mark, can you give us a view there?
Yes, so so the work around the work to decarbonise the portfolio effectively stems from the investment strategy statement that we'll be looking at later as an item. Mm-hmm. That was developed with input from members of the LPB, from members of the Pensions Committee, from a consultation process with scheme members and scheme employers, albeit I recognise, and I think you all understand, that we didn't get much from certain categories of membership, it's fair to say. The detailed work in terms of, well, okay, so that's all, that almost puts in place a framework for us to be able to do something, and the doing is certainly the detailed work has been undertaken with the investment subcommittee. I mean, this is incredibly detailed work, but the communication and the being very clear on what we're doing will be incredibly transparent and will be put in the public domain. Certainly can be discussed. I mean, there's opportunity to discuss this later in the meeting under the investment strategy. But just in broad terms, I would say that I think there has been quite a lot of engagement around it to get to the point where we have the framework, and from there, that's where all the more detailed work takes place. The public questions, again, to be clear on you're perhaps aware of the broad process. So public question comes in. Obviously, we don't have to make a statement within committee as to what the response is, but we can provide a written response afterwards. But what we did do is give a broad response to the questions and then followed them up individually, picking up any bits which we haven't covered in the response within the committee. One of the issues was all of the public questions literally came in on the cusp, to the minute on the cusp of the deadline for questions, which gave us the least possible time to prepare a response. And I wasn't even around at the time so I saw one of them a little bit earlier, but the rest came in when I wasn't even in the office. So that was quite unfortunate. But just to reassure you, we did follow up, picking up some of the aspects which wasn't covered in the, in the actual meeting itself. But we can talk about in more detail about the decarbonisation plans, because there's still some elements which are confidential until we discuss and release them in the public domain.
Understood. I appreciate that guidance, Mark, it's not that I'm unhappy with what is being done. I just want to be able to respond to anybody who says, look, we asked a question and nobody, now I know that question is responded to despite coming in a bit late. That is very reassuring, and I'll now go back to the proper agenda space. Thank you, Chairman.
My pleasure. Your hand is still up, by the way. Are there any other questions on those minutes?
Chairman,
Yes,
Simon King.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. I have my hand up, and it's not a question about the minutes. It's just an apology for being late to the meeting. I was in another virtual meeting, so my apologies for that. But I think I'm happy with the minutes if that's what we're on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm going to take it, just double checking there are no other hands up. I will take it that we are happy to note those minutes, and I will move on then to the internal audit report. And good morning, Jacinka. I believe you're going to be presenting this item.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, thank you. It's Jacinta Frew, just a brief background. Deputy Chief Internal Auditor for the shared service as was, or is. Just to say, I'm presenting to the committee today, but this is probably the first and the last time I will be presenting to the committee because, as you probably are aware, the shared service is being dissolved, ceasing on the 31st of March. I currently look after West Northants and Milton Keynes. So in terms of the report, as the papers say, I'm assuming members have obviously gone through the report in detail. The audit focused on providing assurances on the adequacy of controls over processes for administering the various different functions that the fund does. So our testing, we tested processes that looked at administering members joining the fund, members leaving the fund, processes for ensuring that we collect contributions from the different employers, and sort of processes for ensuring that payments made are accurate. I'm pleased to say overall the findings to give committee the board positive assurance. In terms of sort of the design of controls and in terms of compliance, we do give two opinions, on one being on design and one being on whether there is compliance with the controls in place. So for our testing and the work we've done, we've given a substantial assurance in terms of controls design, which basically says that we found robust control measures in place over the operations and administering of the fund. And we've given an opinion of good in terms of compliance. So for the most part, controls were being complied with and controls were operating effectively, but there were some minor gaps that we identified, which we have raised some recommendations for. I think the positive assurance opinion is kind of illustrated by the fact that we only made three recommendations, and mainly relating to kind of secondary or validatory checks, which I think are in the process of, if not already been implemented. So I think the takeaway from this is that overall we felt there was positive assurance over how the fund was being administered. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Val and Martin, I think you were leading with some of the questions there. Do you have any unresolved questions at the moment? Barry.
Just a minor point. I think Jacinta may have already sort of answered. I just queried page 41 of the paper pack. To the fact that it's signed LGSS, Chief Internal Auditor Approval. And I thought LGSS doesn't exist anymore.
That's right, Councillor. Yes, we probably overlooked taking that off. LGSS did stop in December 2020.
Okay.
Thank you, Barry. Any other? Val?
Just one question, just going forward. This might not be a question for Jacinta. It's probably a question for Mark. What is happening regarding the 21-22 audit regarding the scope, which we discussed early, I think December?
Yes, indeed, I did discuss it with Jacinta. Jacinta, do you want to fill Val in?
Yes, well, we had a meeting with Mark and Joanne earlier this month, primarily to agree in terms of reference, because our process is we agree in terms of reference as to what we're looking to cover for the audit. And we've had a discussion with Mark and Joe, as I said, and we've agreed, and we are going to incorporate the areas committee suggested for the audit, which is due to start February. I know we're at the end of January now. But yes, we will be looking at the areas suggested for this year, as well as the 22-23 audit. We'll pick up some of the areas that you've planned out. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that all, Val? Yeah, okay. Councillor Satter.
Thank you, Chair. Page 40, number 2. I'm reading this as a layperson and not trying to read too much between the lines, but I'm all for trusting advice. But it's obviously a good idea when it's known, perhaps for all sorts of reasons, probably COVID related and working from home and so on, the judgment was exercised rather than following protocols. It obviously is a good idea to write that down. This is not to cast aspersions, but is that the lesson learnt from the auditor picking up on this?
Sorry, I'm not getting the question. Are you saying, why are we raising the recommendation, or are you saying?
No, I can see why you've raised the recommendation. I'm reading the explanation you were given. We were advised that working practice is that where an experienced administrator undertakes the calculation of the transfer value, no independent check is required. The case is up to 10,000. This is not consistent with procedures, and no evidence was provided as to who agreed not to follow procedures in such circumstances. There may be perfectly good reasons for not following procedures, but it clearly is a good idea if there is a paper trail there.
Well, either a paper trail, or we are provided with some evidence, or even if it's not necessarily paper trail, a minute of a meeting or discussion with the senior officer to say, given the circumstances, given the pandemic, yes, it's all right to follow procedure. And we did not find that as part of our testing, and our we were simply told it's something that's happening.
Yes. Is there anything to add from the officer's end?
Yeah, I mean, on this one, I had so Jacinta didn't, as you can see from the names on the audit report, didn't actually undertake the report. I did have a conversation with the auditor after the, so with Minashi after the event. And I mean, ultimately, we would not have been able to get the assurance that I would want if we didn't change the process. So I think I was happy if we had some real de minimis calculations where there weren't independent checks, but in discussion with Minashi, that wouldn't have led to the desired audit results for future audits. And so I agreed to basically make sure we have independent checks for every single calculation, irrespective of value. I mean, and that's quite frankly the sort of discussions we have. So on the third point on the audit report, we simply determine individuals who are capable of doing checks. It doesn't matter what seniority they are, it's capability. And so we've now documented it. So that fulfills that check required change. The second one, we have actually introduced independent checks for everything. So, and we're just making sure that doesn't impact our business too much, of course, because that's an additional ask. But I think, I mean, there was a mixed opinion amongst senior officers around this. So for example, Joe and I don't always necessarily agree on absolutely everything, and probably had difference of view on this as well. So in the end, we went with the audit recommendation.
Okay. Thank you very much. It wasn't distrust motivating me, but just wanting to know that you are at ease with the auditor and she is with you. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I think we ought to recognise the considerable achievement in receiving a very positive audit report. It's to get substantial, I think, is is a good achievement, and I think we ought to just recognise that. Thank you.
Thank you. And with everyone's approval, I believe, I mean, that we certainly should do. And that's congratulations to the officer team. Councillor Soter.
That's actually a thumbs up. I'm agreeing with you, and I'm very glad that
All right,
Vicky
sorry.
said that.
I did notice the hand, though. If there are no further questions, then we are being asked to note the internal audit work, and I believe we have done that. And thank you, Jacinta. If I pronounce your name wrong, my apologies, but thank you for coming along.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'll leave the meeting now unless you need me to stay on.
That's absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Right, we now have the administration report, and Joe, I believe you're presenting this item.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. This is the regular administration report that we bring to every meeting. But in addition, in this particular report, we've provided some extra background with regards to all the other tasks we undertake, as requested by yourselves, that weren't necessarily captured in the KPIs. And the detail of that is in section 2.1 to 2.5. I'm sure you've all read the report and you may have questions. So if I complete going through the report, and then perhaps we can come back to that at the end with any questions you have. Going through the standard content, we have the key performance indicators for the pension service for the period 1st of October to 31st of December. As you'll see, pleased to report that all the KPIs shown on page 49 are all green this reporting period, which is great news. And then next section of the report, section 4, is receipt of employee and employer contributions. The average is currently running at 99.6, not quite 100% for the months of October and November, but that's still a good percentage that we're receiving the schedules and payment mostly on time from all employers. Breaches of the law section, we have the usual the usual refund of contributions that are paid outside the statutory period of 5 years. We had 6 cases of that. Again, we're still waiting for MHCLG to amend the regulations, so that's no longer a breach that we need to report. A different type of breach in this report, which is the internal dispute resolution procedure cases that are at stage 2. So this is where the monitoring officer reviews them and provides a response where a member isn't satisfied with the outcome of stage 1. We have 4 cases that are in a breach situation because the stage 2 adjudicator hasn't responded to them in time or provided the member with an extension notice. I've had an email late last night from the monitoring officer saying that this is being investigated, and we know work is underway, but we really need to make sure that any cases that aren't going to be resolved in the time frame are covered by a extension notice, which hasn't been happening, but I hope that will improve going forwards. But we need to capture that as a breach of the law, because it technically is, even though it's not a breach caused by pension staff, it's still a pension fund activity, so we need to monitor that. And that kind of feeds through into section 6 of this report, which is the actual internal dispute resolution procedure cases that we have ongoing. So as you can see, they're detailed there. They're all ones that are now at stage 2 and then waiting responses from the monitoring officer. And this time we have reported to you the detail of an employer authority dispute that's gone to stage 2. The first section of the table in 6.3 is administering authority disputes. And that's all I wanted to go through in the report, so I'm happy to take any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you very much. Can I just remind everyone that the appendices contain confidential information and not to disclose the names of the individual employers who are listed. Barry.
Just a couple of things. Basically, it's just congratulations on both points. So, yes, the extra information is much better to get a real picture of what the administration does, especially seeing the number of cases that you deal with, and compared to like how many sort of unofficial complaints, non-IDRP. So it really gives a really good flavour of how much work you get through. So yeah, congratulations on that, and also congratulations on all the greens on page 49. That's what it needs to be said.
Thank you, Barry. I'm sure everyone will support you on that. Are there any other questions on the report? Councillor Scott.
Yes, apologies if I'm taking up a lot of committee time, but as a beginner, I do need to ask questions, as you know. It is, as you say, really useful, and indeed, congratulations on the greens. Seeing in section 7, the ins and outs, clearly there's a lot of work involved when somebody appears to go in and come out again. I'm not naming names, Chairman. And I just wondered if this is a reflection of COVID uncertainties and changes, or is it anything more? Just a quick enlightenment would be good. Thank you.
Sorry, section 7 being the employers entering and leaving the scheme. Yeah. No, I mean, these tend to be a lot of the activity tends to be around short-term contracts awarded for things like catering and cleaning at schools. And so they have a very short lifespan relative to, well, a county council, for example. So the pension fund is obviously, if any employer needs to protect the pension rights of staff, they tend to do it through the ongoing access to the LGPS. And yes, the nature of those contracts are short-term in nature quite often. I don't think there's been any consequence of COVID in terms of extra movement of employers. There's been a few discussions around contributions, but nothing of any real materiality.
Thank you, that's very helpful. It does look like employee defence then, and I'm all for that, as is a safe place for them to go in and out of. Thank you.
Councillor Slatter, was the question particularly about Stephen Peirce Foundation joining and then leaving? I mean, it's to be reported in the same...
I wasn't going to name the name, but knowing it's a school, I could see why that would be answered.
Papers. This section of the report is entirely public. So
yeah, there was a number of employers where our processes, obviously we will facilitate these employers coming into the scheme if that's what is desired by the awarding authority or the awarding academy, for example, and that's what the potential admission body wants, the contractor. Sometimes, though, we reach the point where we get no response whatsoever, and so we just close our file on the case. And then the employer will come along and go, can we retrospectively sort this out? They then get engagement with their contractor. So we don't push things. It's up to we provide the access if that is what is required, because the contractor can use alternative means of protecting pension rights. They don't have to use the LGPS. They can provide a broadly comparable scheme. So it isn't sort of a definitive thing that they will definitely use the LGPS. So yes, if we've closed our file, sometimes we open it up again later. And that's when you sometimes get these cases which come through and close down at pretty much the same point in time, because they're retrospectively trying to sort it out.
Okay, thank you. Val.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I'm just really want to add a comment in respect of the administration performance item 2. Like Barry, I think this extra piece of information was absolutely brilliant, and I'm really pleased to see how few, complaints, and also great to see some compliments. I just wonder, is this something that's going to be in any of our future administration performance reports, or is it's just a one-off to show us sort of what happens? Is it just an example, or whether this would be useful going forward? But I'm not sure how much time this takes you guys to bring all this together.
It's not so obviously the thing which what we've done here is we've obviously given sort of a historical performance over a period. I mean, it's not that difficult to get this information, to be clear. So it's up to you really what you would like to see. So please don't think it's overly onerous for us to provide this. I mean, certainly the thing that I think is, so we've given you an idea of the scale, and that's not going to change. I mean, that's always going to be pretty much similar. The thing which I thought actually most shows how the level is probably the member feedback. So on most calculations we do, without kind of cherry picking, we just send and invite all of them to provide a response to a survey. And obviously the ratings we get do change over time. I've seen an improvement from, I think I was quite open that when you were seeing some KPIs that didn't look that great, we also had some performance issues in certain areas that I wanted to address. And so I've seen that pick up. But beyond that, I think it's up to you what you would like to see.
Well,
What do other board members feel?
I was personally going to say, if this is not a great deal of effort, I would like to see it on a regular basis.
I'd agree, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree as well.
Okay.
Simon, is that an agree, or you have a question?
No, that is a hand up to say I agree, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay,
Thank you.
what you'll see is it will turn into effectively a quarterly performance around those sort of areas. We'll do what we can, and so if you look at what we send next time, and see if that's that meets your purposes.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Just for information, where is Feldale Internal Drainage Board? Does anybody know?
I don't. It's apologies. It's simply a
No,
name
no.
to me.
Yes, I appreciate that. It's not a name I'm particularly familiar with. If somebody at some stage could just drop me a line where it is, I'm curious. That's all.
I think it's been working on some of the developments. Isn't it part of construction? But I don't. You've seen the vans go by.
IDBs tend to be permanent things, but as I say, it's not important. I'm just curious. So we're being asked to note this report. I think we're all happy to do so. Then fine, let us move on. And we come to the risk register. Michelle, I believe this one is for you.
Yes, thank
Your
you.
report on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if I could draw your attention to section 2.2 of the report, this contains the information on the proposed changes that we're considering for this period. As you'll see from the table, most of the updates there are down to the mitigations. Most of them are updated, and there's some additional ones in there just to ensure that the risk register remains fit for purpose. The only exception to that is risk 24, and we discussed this last time with the risk scoring being changed because we were having difficulty recruiting. That's been rectified now, and we have managed to recruit into the establishment, so we felt it appropriate to move that one down. 2.4 of the report is the standard short-term risks that we bring to you. There's a very brief update on the pandemic there. But the other short-term risk that we're still facing is the skills and knowledge. not particularly a reflection of this particular board, but across the board and committee, there are still some modules that haven't been undertaken. So as you'll see there, for anybody that hasn't undertaken them all, we've now extended that deadline to the 31st of January in the hope that everybody would have completed by that time, and therefore that short-term risk should disappear at some point in the near future. So just referring to the actual risk register itself in Appendix 1, after discussion and comments and feedback we've had previously, you'll see that we've actually changed the layout a bit on the executive summary. So what you'll see now is the previous assessment and residual risk rating against the current assessment and residual rating for each review that we do. And alongside that, we've got any risk movements and any associated comments or actions with that. So just referring to risk 24, which was the one that I said did have the risk scoring change for this particular one. So that demonstrates there that we've moved the scoring. There's a clear downward arrow there to make it easier for you to see, and also just an explanation in there. So we're hoping that going forward, this will be easier for you as members of the board to capture basically the changes that we're making on the register and have a direct comparison of what we've done previously. The only other thing really to mention on the actual appendix is, for ease, what we've tried to do is move the objectives into the appendix as well for you. So whereas before we were cross-referencing appendix in a separate business plan document, they are also in the back of this document as well to try and make life a bit easier. Obviously, if we were to put the objectives in the actual table, it would make the tables absolutely huge. So I think that's what we've come up with so far. But as always, I'm happy to take any further comments or suggestions either on the proposed risks or the actual layout of the register itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Councillor Satter.
Thank you. And that's, I would say that compared with lots of the other risk registers I'm having to deal with, both the council and outside bodies, I find yours easiest to read, Michelle. Now, I did have a question about one of the risks, and that is member training. But I look to you, Mr. Chair, if to know whether it belongs somewhere else on the agenda, or may I pursue it now?
I'm happy for it to be pursued now.
Okay, because obviously it is a risk in terms of you know, our competence if our training is not completed, and we do owe it to the pensioners to know what as well as we can. I have to watch the videos at least twice, for example. So even if one has finished looking at them, the fact that they have been kept available, if I may say so, is really good. And if they could be almost permanently there for future reference, that would be much appreciated if that's allowed under intellectual property. I know that's Aeon we'd be dealing with there. The other thing is whether members who are not yet on the committee or the board could be invited to join, especially these online training sessions and conferences. There's one coming up in March, for example, to enable people to get their eye in if they're considering being a member of the pension board. This would also, I think, be very sensible and save this time lag with the newbies. And I think it's to add on for online is free, and so would be a reasonable way of using the council's resources. I think that would be my suggestion.
Yes, thank you. I mean, what I would say is this original training that we've put on, we obviously had a large number of new members on the committee and board, so it was imperative we got something out quick to give everybody the comprehensive level of training that they needed. What will happen now is we'll develop something a bit more long term and hopefully come up with a longer term training plan. So in addition to this training, we will be reviewing what training needs, you know, updating and what will be relevant to you at specific times. For example, the valuation training that we have next week. That's an additional piece of training that we know that will be of direct value because the valuation's coming up. And yes, what you're saying about external conferences as well. We although we're offering this core, well, asking everyone to do this core training, if anybody does want to do, you know, online training, and there are other establishments externally doing them as well, as long as they're deemed to be appropriate for your roles, then we would support those as well. So I think it's a bit of a two-pronged approach in terms of, you know, there will be everything we offer, but we are more than happy for supplementary training to be taken up as well. I don't know if, Joe, you want to add anything extra on the training?
There's also the question of whether it can be offered to people not on the board at the moment or on the committee at the moment.
Yeah, I'll pick up on those points if I may. The trouble we have with the training is that some of those modules can come out of date very quickly in the moving world of pensions. So we do need to be making sure that they're relevant, and then people aren't spending time learning things that are no longer applicable. Also, with regards to, there are only a couple of members that we could perhaps prepare for, knowing that they sort of seats on the board, that we could perhaps prepare to know who would be replacing them. So we have to be a bit careful about how we train people. And I know that Aon are a bit protective about their intellectual property, and have raised a few concerns that perhaps this training, these modules that we've just issued to you, could be spread further and wider than perhaps they're prepared for it to go. So we do need to be a bit careful about giving out too much intellectual property, just in case it doesn't take up a seat on the board and those kind of things. But yeah, it's a big area, and we're conscious that there is a lot more to do on the training side, but it's just trying to deliver it in the best way possible, bearing in mind things change constantly. Michelle says there's evaluation training next week. I'm also about to send around invites for a cyber training session on the 8th of March as well. So lots going on in front of us. But yeah, we try to do it the best way we can, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to deliver training and have it available at all times to keep it up to date as well. So we're working to the best of our abilities to make that as good as we possibly can.
It's certainly good, don't get me wrong. I'm just concerned that if you find yourself not knowing anything and you're in the job, it would be good if you'd known beforehand that you were thinking of doing it, or if there's people who've already been elected to the council and they may be interested within the 4-year term, to be able to admit those perhaps one by one. I understand the intellectual property business, but if they could be sort of authorised, that would, I think, would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think this year the elections were a bit of a challenge for us because there were so many new members. So yeah, but when it's not an election year, we can do a bit more preparation.
Thank you. Mary?
Okay. Yeah, just to pick up upon the sort of training side of things, because I'm part of a unison grouping of member representatives on various pension boards and pension committees, I often get opportunities through unison. So just wondering whether so some of those opportunities are not. So recently I attended a presentation by Carbon Tracker, but apparently that's open to anybody. They're willing to give talks. So I'm just wondering, is it reasonable to pass on the information when I hear of these opportunities?
Yeah, I think under the old policy, we welcomed any kind of unison training that was relevant, and we obviously applied credits to that. I would say, although we're not on the credit system now, that as long as it's obviously relevant to your roles, presumably this training's free training, is it, Barry?
Yeah. They're happy to go into any organisation, and they already said that they've already provided presentations. Can't remember, various LGPS funds anyway.
Yeah,
Can't remember off the top of my head.
Keep a record of everybody's training, including anything that's external as well. So all I would say is if anybody is going on any additional training, if they let me know, I can obviously record that for you as well, so we can publish that.
But it's just about the sort of sharing with other pension board members, or even potentially committee members to attend the training that I hear of.
Could I just,
Yeah.
sorry, may I just come in there?
Yeah.
This comment isn't in relation to Carbon Tracker, but just a general point. And we obviously have to be careful in case the training is, for example, promotional. Many companies will look to effectively promote what they have available in certain spaces. It might be non-neutral in approach. So we obviously like to give a rounded view on in terms of advice, and it might also actually be advocating an approach which is at a different end of the spectrum to what our professional advisors are advocating. And so there is a danger in certain training, but it's probably more when there are companies who are looking to wanting the fund to do something, and so I would just exercise caution. But other than that, obviously the more learning you can get, the better you can perform your roles.
I suppose another way of doing it is maybe any that you're unsure of, send through to us and we can have a look and maybe give our opinion on whether we think it would be suitable to share with others, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other point, I've finally worked it out, but I'm gonna share it anyway in case anybody, other board members didn't work it out. But risk 13, which is page 75 of the paper pack, it was just the last acronym right at the bottom where it said resulting from GGR. I've worked out it's good governance review. Oh, yeah. I've only just worked that out, and I was thinking, what's that mean? So yeah, it's more and more a point now. Now I've worked it out.
And so Barry, are you totally clear on what's BLUHC?
Yeah. I've seen that acronym plenty of times. Yeah.
I do pity anybody from there who actually has to use that frequently. But there we go. Val.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair. Also on risk 13, please. It's just a bit of confusion here. There is a control that says conflicts of interest policy in place for local pension board. And then it talks about the conflicts of interest to be developed following the guidance from the scheme advisory board and the etc. From the good governance review. Are these two different things? So I'm just a bit confused here.
Yeah, what happened with this area is when the local pension boards first come into place, it was mandated that we needed to have a conflicts of interest policy. So we did that straight away. So what's happened is there is a live conflicts of interest policy in place, published on our website at the moment, but it only covers the local pension board. So as things have developed, it's now deemed more appropriate actually to have a conflicts of interest policy covering wider than just the board, to include the committee at least as well. So it kind of, both statements are right, as in there is one, but we need to develop a better one. So you are covered by one at the moment, but that will change and you'll be covered by a more comprehensive one that includes other stakeholders as well. Yeah.
Okay, I've got one or two other questions on the risk register. This probably is for Mark. The data and improvement policy plan are in place and viewed annually. That obviously is preventative control. Can I just ask, is the detective control the dedicated employer services team to query and chase the data as required?
You're on mute, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've obviously picked up that the majority of our data does come from scheme employers, and now quite often through the monthly iConnect submissions, although a few that still do year end. But I think that's part of it. I think the data quality is broader than that. It does encompass things which are scheme member related as well. So a lot of the common data is around things like names and date of birth being correct, marital status being correct, but particularly also NI number is the one which we fail on quite often, because we've got the wrong NI number. So that is part of it. Some of it is scheme member related as well. Some of it is where things can go wrong once we've got the data. So if we, as you can probably appreciate, we run numerous bulk processes that update data. For example, the pensions increase process is run against the entire membership. That doesn't involve scheme employers. So I think it's brought. So yes, what you've described is part of that detective process, but there are other things as well going on.
Okay.
So we're updating the data improvement plan at the moment. We've got a revised one, which was going to come to this meeting actually. So it will probably it will be operational almost, but we'll bring it for review at the next meeting. I think, Joe, that's the plan, isn't it now? Yeah, no, Joe's nodding, yeah. So we almost had it ready for this meeting.
Okay. Risk 15. There is officers of the fund engaged quarterly with the monitoring the custodian performance. I just wonder, where does the report go to on the performance of the custodian? Is that to the investment subcommittee?
There is an annual review, but that doesn't go to the investment subcommittee. That goes to the what used to go to the annual general meeting of the fund. As we used to call it. So if you're probably aware, there's 4 normal pensions committees, and then there's an additional one where there's used to be a deep dive on the custodian. The custodian now is, of course, it's almost a different relationship because most of our assets have moved into the pool. And so all the custodian is seen as a single line of the holding within the pool. And the main custodian relationship is actually with Link, who appoint a custodian, a depository, and that there's lots of data being shared there. So anything else which is being done at an officer level. Okay, so we're directly with our custodian.
Okay, I'm sorry, I've got 1 or 2 other questions. Number 20. I just wondered, the investment performance report is reported to the fund actuary. It was one of the new controls. I just wonder, what does he actually do with that? Because just sending it is not in some respect an effective control, but what he actually does with it when he gets there is a very effective control. Does he then come back with some analysis for you guys, or what does he do?
So what this is effectively saying is that the actuary is aware of the performance of the fund on a far more frequent basis than they used to be, and it's because of the heat system as part of it. And the idea around that was that actually that scheme employers can get far more accurate accounting information with less reliance on us having to do exercises at various points through the year. Beyond that, obviously, as you're aware, the actuary's primary role is to do the triennial valuation. So it's only really every 3 years that we have that material change to contributions as a result of the exercise undertaken. So I'm not really sure if I'm answering the question you specifically asked. Am I? Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
And then on 25, I just think there's probably a typo, unless I'm just not reading this correctly. The updated version was, and I'll read this verbatim, the fund has an appropriate investment strategy statement in place, which the fund's responsible investment. I think it's just a typo.
Yes. Which includes the fund's responsible investment policy is what they should say. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, that's the end of my queries. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Val. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a couple of things. First of all, on the training front, I don't seem to be getting any invitations to training at the moment. I wondered if you could check that you are using my Yahoo address, please.
Yeah, I'll double check. So you've not received the valuation one, or?
No.
Oh,
No, I
okay.
haven't. No, I certainly don't remember. I mean, we all miss emails occasionally, but I don't remember receiving that, Michelle. But
Okay,
if you
I'll
could check,
chase
that'd be
that
great.
up. Yeah, I will do.
And I wondered, just to make sure that we are all properly trained, as it's on the risk register, would it be possible to email each of us individually without copying in the others, because obviously people have a right to privacy, what training we should have undertaken at this stage that we haven't? Because I'm a little bit confused with the ending of the credit system.
Okay, yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean, in terms of the core training, the board are fully up to date with that. So I know that all that's been undertaken, which is really good.
Yep.
Apart from that, I think there was just an initial introduction session, so I could check on that. And everything since that point hasn't been compulsory, but I can give some details about what has been undertaken, just so you've got it for your own records. Any additional training that you've done.
Yes, and it would also be useful, I think, even if it's not required or core training, if there's anything that the officers feel we would benefit from, if you could maybe flag that up as well, so that we can factor that into our future training.
Yeah, will do.
That's really kind of you, Michelle. Thanks. And I also had one question. And this is probably quite a stupid question, but it's in Appendix 1, and it's on the first page, well, page 4, or page 4, page 68, depending upon how you're reading it. And it's number 2 on that page. There are two ones. There are two that go from red to amber. But I'm assuming those are two separate assessments. I'm particularly interested in 2, and why in the first column it's red, and then in the second, the final column, it's amber. Just wondered if you could expand on that, which would clarify then a lot of other things as well with different rags.
Yeah, so on the red rag statuses on those ones, they're the ones that we deemed as red from the gross total. So they're basically the risks without any mitigations in place.
Right.
So as you move across the table and move across the controls that we have in place, we then reassess the risk based on the controls that we have in place, and then move those risks down accordingly. With the first few on there that have only gone down to amber, it's usually because there is an element that is outside of the pension fund's control. So with those ones, it might be that we only ever get to amber, or we can move it down a bit, but we may never get to a green position, just because of the nature of the risk that we're talking about, and hence why they're top of the list. So it's really just the comparatives between unmitigated risks against the mitigations that we've put in place, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Michelle. That's what I was assuming it was. And I wondered if it would be possible to perhaps include something under those risks that you think are unlikely ever to get to green. An explanation of why, of what is beyond our control and that will likely always prevent us getting to green.
Yep, we can have a look at that and see if there's any additional context we can put into that for you. No
I think that would be really helpful. And thank you very much, Michelle. Good report.
Chairman, could I just come in on that last comment, because we had a very similar question yesterday from the Northamptonshire LPB, and if I just say what they asked, and then see if one of these would actually answer the query. So Councillor King has just answered. So the suggestion was whether we look at actually stating what our risk appetite or our target for a particular risk is. So in effect, we would be saying, we can't, this is what we're prepared to accept, this is what we're aiming for, and we're not going to be able to go any further than that. And I think that would probably answer the question Councillor King has just posed.
I think that is a really good suggestion. And I just regret, Mark, not thinking of it myself. So yeah, so well
So-
done, Northamptonshire. Yeah, good for them.
So,
But yeah,
yeah,
that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
okay.
Councillor Slater.
Yes, I think some indication of the sort of khaki ones in that way would be very helpful, because obviously the fire authority's got lots of khaki ones if we have that nomenclature. A quick technical point, Councillor King. If you're using an email address outside the Cambridgeshire Gov, you may well, unless Michelle takes precautions, not know what date is being talked about, let alone what time. Of the training that's being offered, and you may not be able to actually find out what that is until you've accepted it. This is a quirk of Teams. I know this is on Zoom, but if you're getting something's on Teams, you also may be finding that stuff's going by without you realising there's a date involved at all. I just point that out to you because it's caused me a lot of grief in the last few months trying to work out the diary responses.
I haven't experienced that because the invitations come with an option to add it to the calendar, and that does then indicate, or to my calendar, and that then it does indicate, you know, the all the detail that you need. So I haven't experienced that problem.
Oh, good. I know Rhiannon's still wrestling with getting things into my calendar. We won't go any further on that one. Just to quickly thank Barry for his suggestion of sharing options. I think we have to exercise judgment. There's all sorts of things with commercial bias or whatever bias. I think you have to trust us to sort of see that. It's a long time since I paid my dues to Unison, but I would be pleased to see their things. Very often getting things from a different angle, following up on what Councillor King said, helps you absorb what you've been told already. And that is the problem. You can have the training, it's retaining it is my problem. I realise some things do go out of date, but retention, certainly I'm finding with my overloaded brain, is the problem. So if we get invitations, I'd be very happy with that. And if they come through Michelle, fine, that's good too. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm not a Unison member, but I'm not a nurse anymore.
Thank you, Councillor Slater. Can I just say, of board members, you are the only one member who actually has a Cambridgeshire County Council email address. I think.
I don't have one. That's my problem.
Okay, well, in which case, none of us have a
Okay.
county council email address.
I'm sorry to waste your time, Chair.
No, not at all. It's just a detail. Sorry, except Barry does. Sorry, Barry.
Yeah. I'm just pointing out that I have one because I'm employed by Cambridgeshire County Council.
My apologies. So there is one who does, not. And Simon, a quick check. As far as I can see, you were on the invitation for the training on valuation.
In that case, I must have missed it. Would it be possible, Michelle, to resend it to me, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say it must be a technical issue because when we issue training and indeed emails, we do it on a group one. So everybody, obviously, all you guys are on one group. So I'd expect no one to have it or everyone to have it. So it does sound a bit of a technical issue maybe at your end, but obviously I'll resend it and I'll double check this time to make sure you've actually received it.
My apologies. I might have just overlooked it, but there we are.
Martin.
Just while we're on that point, a number of those emails that are going out, they're not blind copying those email addresses. So all of those personal email addresses are visible to everybody. It should be blind copied.
Oh, okay. I'll double check that. I do try and do that. Maybe the last ones didn't. I will double check and certainly make sure going forward they are.
I think the point, Martin, is to assume that councillors, by the very nature of their public presence, are assumed to have public email addresses. But I may be wrong on that one.
Yes, I have a public email address, and I would be sorry if we can't email one another. But if Martin, it feels protective of his, I certainly wouldn't want it to be.
No, agree.
Shared. But I have one. I've made up my own, which says councillor on it. Thank you.
I very much agree with what Councillor Satter has said, Chair. I think it would be a shame if we couldn't email each other. Obviously, those of us who don't wish to share their email addresses, then obviously they could be blind copied. But I personally would prefer for my email address to be included as a non-blind copy address. Thank you.
Martin.
I fully understand everything that everyone's saying there. Councillors would want their addresses to be seen, which is why they actually have Cambridgeshire County Council and Northamptonshire ones. Personal addresses are protected by GDPR.
Okay.
You can't show them.
Yeah.
Okay, I give my authority for mine to be used.
Can we move on from
Not
this?
get anybody in trouble.
Okay. We have been asked to review the pension fund risk register. I believe we've done that and a number of other things as well. And I will take by affirmation your approval to move on. Fine. Thank you very much. Mark, business plan update.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'll go through and pick up the developments as concisely as I can. So 3.1 investment consultancy contract, pleased to say that was, if you recall, we extended the contract to allow for some senior directors' signatures within the US from Mercer. That was effective from 8th of December. So that's been concluded, as has the global custody contract, which was procured first of all jointly by Access and then by us individually. So that's been concluded as well. BCP 3.6 and cyber resilience are later on the agenda, so I won't dwell on those. We can have an update later. I'll go for a couple more, then pause. 3.9, the guaranteed minimum pension rectification. You can see we have now run a bulk update of all the variances against our using a sort of bulk update tool that we had from our software supplier. And what we're left with is about 1,900 under overpayment cases that we need to work our way through. This was completely expected, as you're aware. This has been a very long-standing business activity. The proposal would be not to recover any overpayment because the individual is very, very unlikely to have any clue at all that they're being overpaid. So that's something I will just double check that we've got the appropriate approval from the committee on that. But I believe we do. And then we'll be working that through that and completing it in the next financial year. Okay, so I'll pause there. Just if there are any questions on those activities. I can see.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to, just this general question. I mean, I can see it's basically effectively been signed off, but 3.1 about the investment advisory services. I just wanted to ask Mark a general question. When it comes to the sort of tendering for investment consultancy, the way I see it, it's kind of the investment committee, sorry, the pensions committee and the pension board, and to a certain degree officers, our views are kind of led by the consultants. I just wondered whether, in the same sense that we surveyed pension board members and pension committee members about our responsible investment beliefs, is this as part of the tendering exercise, do you kind of check with these consultants what their sort of core beliefs are? Or is it just all purely on sort of financial kind of, do they provide good value for money?
When you do, as you know, when you do a tender, you can't be too subjective. It has to be, they have to be objective questions. I guess we kind of have a similar situation with, for example, actuarial methodology. The actuaries undertake different different approaches, and we may have views on those, but ultimately we have to take the tender back to a set of very, very objective questions and score them appropriately. And so that's on things like, you know, the quality of their team, providing support and the resilience that is there. I think where they tend to differ these days, Barry, is around things like they will obviously rate each investment manager, and it's and they may view different investment managers differently. But I guess what we're more interested from a tender perspective would be, you know, the rigor in how they assess those companies, and the breadth of investment managers that they cover, and those sorts of things, as well as, of course, value for money and costs that comes into it. So I don't really think there's we might do soft market testing sometimes on certain tenders to start to understand how they operate and indeed what questions we might need to ask. But what you described, I don't think is a path we would go down.
Okay, I've got a number of sort of points, Chair, just to go through. So page 94, 3.10.3.
I'm not up to there yet.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just to be clear, I've gone through a few activities, and I was just pausing to see on any that I've gone through.
Okay. I'll finish there then.
Okay.
Mark, can I try Barry's question a different way?
Yeah, of course.
If we were to ask the advisors that you were going to for advice on responsible investment, would you expect different advice? So is the fact that we have gone with one particular advisor giving us advice that might differ from another?
So they would all be, I'm pretty sure in saying this, I would expect them to be advocating sort of a decarbonisation approach over divestment of sectors or regions. For example, as I say, I think what I did is I drew up where I felt that the main differences are, which is on the ratings they would give individual managers.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of the more broader stuff, I think they would come along with similar approaches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Unless I don't see any hands up, so would you like to move on from 3.10?
Yes, so of course. Yeah, of course. Thank you. So yeah, just on the age discrimination remedy, McLeod, we are in the process of collecting employer data. We've got a lot of the data now. So we felt we had, as I think I've said before, we felt we had been asking employers for everything that we needed anyway. And so this is the opportunity to fill in the gaps, unlike some other funds where they hadn't been asking employers for this data all along. So we've got a lot of the data in. Some of the larger, we're still in very active discussions with them about kind of nailing it down a bit with a higher quality than it is at the moment. What I would say by way of update is, if anyone who attended the LGPC conference the other day, which I know Barry certainly did, and I think Dennis, I think you did as well, you'll be aware that the likely legislation, the effective date of legislation for McLeod is likely to have been pushed back from April 2023 effective date to October 2023. That's what the DLUC civil servant was saying. We are learning a lesson of some other funds, and we are being very, very careful about what we're loading into our system. Some funds have loaded what was received, and it has overwritten good data with very poor data. So we are being very, very careful in these employer updates, and so I'm happy for it to take a little bit longer than we first thought. Particularly bearing in mind we're not going to need that data for quite a period yet anyway. So in terms of McLeod, that's effectively the update that I have. Valuation, you're aware we've got the training next week. The other thing which is we are undertaking, which is mentioned in the text, is we are doing what we call compass modeling, which is the stochastic or probability based modeling for the very, very large employers. We're actually running that at this moment. So we'll be having some results coming through within a month or two of that. So that's we do that quite early in the valuation process usually. And I'll do one more before I pause, because this may also generate some questions, which is the undecided leavers. Again, not gone as I wanted. We're actually putting in place some more resource now. So I'm putting in place some more resource both in the project team and in the business as usual team, because the issues with progressing this are twofold. One, the project team isn't doing enough cases because they've been waylaid by the McLeod project, so I'm having to put in extra resource to cope with the other projects as well. And then secondly, the business as usual team hasn't been doing enough cases, which means some cases are being pushed through to become aged, and therefore they're also impacting the backlog numbers. So that resource will be feeding through the business plan. It is materially not going to change the numbers, because one or two extra people doesn't tip the dial in terms of the cost to the fund. But I felt I had to do that. And alongside the resources, not just about resources, it's also about process. So we are making a number of process changes to improve things as well. But I will pause there to see if there are any questions around any of those.
All right.
Okay, now I've got the right point to discuss this. So 3.10.3, page 94. It's just the last line. It just says that for any nil returns, the pension service will assume the data held is correct over time. So I just wondered, is there not any kind of like big stick to hit the employers with, because this is basically where the employers just don't respond?
Well, we would like them to say there's a nil return, but the reality is, as I said, the things which are the things which we're effectively asking for, if we cut through it, is any changes in hours or any service breaks that they've not provided us with. And yet we've always asked employers to provide us with changes in hours and service breaks. So what we're saying really is, if there's anything you've not told us about, then please provide it and we will update the records. And we, of course, we would like people to go, there's nothing that you need to update. But the reality is we've got to process benefits on the information received. So if ultimately they don't, then we are where we are and we've got the data we have. And if it is wrong, then obviously individuals can state that their record isn't correct. But I'm not sure. I'm not really sure, bearing in mind we've always asked for this information. I know sometimes, for example, aren't actually going to the lengths we are. And therefore, if they actually sometimes know that certain employers should have provided accurate data, and therefore aren't asking. Only a final thing I will add is we are targeting. So, for example, a large employer where we know they've used iConnect and therefore the data should be correct for certain periods, we're explicitly asking them about certain other periods, just to make sure that they haven't got any problems there.
Thank you. There are no other hands up, Mark. So if you'd like to continue, perhaps through to the end.
Yeah, I don't think there's much, to be fair, I don't think there's much more, because we're picking up on the RI in 3.1.7 when we talk about the investment strategy statement. So the only other thing I would just flag in on page 107, which are the financial numbers. You can see that at the bottom of that page, that second table, effectively the administration budget is the bit I have the ability to control the most. The governance costs, the investment invoice costs, so there is obviously less control over, because they are performance led or demand led. And you'll see that we're slightly under on staff costs, but a couple of the other the Altair administration system projects, we've been doing that extra activity around, particularly around McLeod. But the net variance is obviously 26k versus a budget of 2.5 million, so it's projected to be quite tightly controlled.
Thank you.
That's my update.
Are there any remaining questions, Barry?
Picked up on a typo on page 97. So what I've got left is all to do with page 97. So 3.15.1. Sorry, just trying to read my notes. So on the second line, so PwC to carry out covenant assessments for those employers should be considered.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and still same page, 3.15.2. I just wondered why the third line down, why the date, it says September 21 to October 21, but it says on target rather than maybe completed.
Yes, it has been. Sorry, it has been completed.
Right.
That's just we've just not updated the timeline. Apologies there.
Okay, and okay, no, that's fine. I think that's all my points.
Thank you, Barry. If there are no other questions, we've been asked to review the, asked to note the business report. I believe that's been fairly thoroughly done. So thank you very much, Mark. Well, comprehensive report as always. The compliance report. Joe, I think this is one for you.
Thank you, Chairman. In the interest of time, I'll just pick out a few items and take any questions at the end. So firstly, in section 2.1, we have the DLUHC annual update on the statistics for the English and Welsh LGPS funds as a total. As you'll see from the detail in 2.1.1, membership, expenditure, income, fund values have all on the up, increasing in value, and you can see the scheme is absolutely quite enormous when you look at it in its total in England and Wales. Further information on that report can be found in the link detailed in 2.1.2. 2.4, Mark will address that perhaps in a bit more detail in his access update with regards to the pressure from the Scheme Advisory Board to appoint member representatives to allow member representatives at the joint committee meetings. Other than that, section 2.5.1 starts with details of new legislation that came into place on the 30th of November. That will give us as a pension fund greater strength to prevent pension scams and prevent members from perhaps transferring out to a scheme that will not be, which may be a scam. There's a lot of detail surrounding this, and if you attended the governance conference run by LGPC last week, you'll see it's quite a complex area. It involves a lot of due diligence on behalf of officers in terms of the questions and investigations we need to carry out to see if this transfer should go ahead or not. But I can say that from a fund point of view, we have done an awful lot of work already to put in place what's required from these new regulations, and we're in a good place with regards to that. So I feel we've done everything we can to protect ourselves and comply with the new legislation. Also, moving to 2.6, skills and knowledge opportunities. We've talked about this at length with various other reports. Firstly, also to apologise for 2.6.6 to 2.6.8, which is a duplication of 2.6.3 to 2.6.5. So apologies for that. And just to point out the training schedule, at the time of publishing this report, we didn't have the date of the cyber training, which is now going to be the 8th of March. It will be virtual. It will be at 10 a.m. The details around that are going to be very secure. So when we send you the links for the training session, it will be more secure than normal. The session will be recorded, and we just ask that the recording isn't shared with anybody else other than the board members. No forwarding on to anybody else. And we've also, if anybody wants to attend the PLSA ESG conference on the 9th to the 10th of March, also online, to let Michelle know as soon as possible so we can make that booking. And a reminder, of course, that the evaluation training on the 1st of February, which is next Tuesday at 2:30. Again, it will be recorded and shared if you're unable to attend the live session. So happy to take any questions on that report.
Thank you very much, Joe. Barry.
I suspect it's just a typo, but page 110, 2.2.2, the very last line, it says the North Hampshire Fund is not one of those 4 funds. Should that actually say Cambridgeshire?
Yes, and also should say yes, and it's also not Northamptonshire. So yeah.
Yeah.
That all, Barry?
Yeah. I think you covered my other question earlier, Joe.
Thank you very much. We spent some time on training a previous item. So are there any further questions or issues with this report? In which case, Joe, thank you very much. We regard that report as noted. So we now have we're now moving on to the engagement report. This was a report, as noted, that I'd asked for, particularly after the consultation that went out to members in the summer. So is this being presented by Sharon?
It is, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, Sharon. Welcome.
Good morning. Yes, as you said, we were asked to report on the level of engagement for our communications activities, and also what we've got planned in the future to try and improve our level of engagement. We looked at various different mediums and how we engage with our stakeholders, and various different ways include consultations, surveys, emails and newsletters. And we then compared them with industry benchmarks as a way to see, I guess, how well we can performing against other public sector industries. So I would say we were pretty pleased with what we found, and actually it was quite a favourable report in that we were above average in sort of many areas, like for example member emails. And we use a system that I think, well, I know that Cambridge Council also use. It's a bulk email system called Gov Delivery, and it's designed for sending out bulk emails in the public sector. And the appendix section 2.3 shows that our member in particular email open rates at 60% are actually way higher than the top 20% for the overall UK public sector, which sits at 39%. So we were really pleased with what that showed us. Examples of the types of things we might email members about, and particularly last year we used it to great effect with to let them know about the new pension administration and the new branding, also to welcome our new joiners to the scheme. We see that as a good opportunity to communicate with our our new members and to get them to join the online pension account, and also in particular our annual benefit statements. So we were on the whole pretty pleased with what we found, although we always appreciate there's ways where we can improve. And some of these areas are sort of firstly in the area of the consultations, which are Chair that you mentioned with the investments. We plan to work very closely with the consultation and engagement team, and they've given us quite a few pointers where we can sort of run through before we do our consultations just to make sure that we've considered all of those. To share best practice with other funds, we do belong to a national communications working group and also a regional one. And we've recently volunteered to join the subgroups on engagement and the LGA's website design. So we're looking to really sort of get to the nitty-gritty and share and learn about best practice there. Also to work on joint communications with larger organisations, with organisations like Unison and maybe some of the larger councils, sort of some wider topics that are appropriate perhaps for pensions, and also sort of wider, maybe on digital fraud and things like that, that have wider implications on not just pensions. And to also, we do have some pensions made simple videos, and we feel that perhaps there's more we could do to promote those, because they're really good at sort of chunking up pensions in a nutshell to help explain what can be seen as quite a scary topic or a complex topic. And to actually come up with perhaps some new videos. We've been working with one of the people in Northamptonshire comms team to actually trying to develop a video for encouraging members to sign up to their online pension account and to also help them to do that. So we're looking at working more closely on that. Another area we're looking at is to conduct a website review, which I believe will be going into the business plan. And there's quite a bit of learning that we have there from the LGA and what they've recently done. They're shortly about to launch theirs. Some of the barriers to engagement that we looked at has made us think that maybe we should look at life stage communications and look at different messages we could do with different segments to target those, and to also test different approaches. So even simple things like when we send out an email, we were thinking we could just even change the title, so you've got half of the emails going out with one title and half with a different type of title, just to see if that what effect that might have on open rates. So there's lots of different things that we think we can do to actually improve engagement levels even further than we already have. I wasn't going to go into too much more depth. There's quite a bit actually in the appendix itself, but I was going to keep it quite high level. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Well, there's a few hands up.
Councillor Slater.
Yes, among our pensioners, in terms of communicating with them, and obviously you're assuming that most are on email, and you may well be right, but they may not use them very much. Mm-hmm. I'm aware now, with 9 grandchildren, of quite a generation divide. I'm probably the only one who uses Facebook a lot, but I think that is true of people of my age group. I'm 70, by the way, or over 70, just. A Facebook group attached to this new website might well be a good vehicle for showing people little videos and things. You can also nick them off other people's Facebook pages, you know, And because, well, like Unison, for example, I'm sure they have this. I'm sure Barry's got a lot of experience in terms of getting in touch with members in different ways, different members in different ways. It's not a one size fits all, but I would suggest that a Facebook group, I should say, actually, would be a good one for getting some of this stuff out, because I think a lot of people use smartphones in that way quite readily and may not open their emails from one week to the next. Just a thought.
It's a good point about social media. Sorry to interrupt.
I don't know. I was otherwise going to say something. I think might be Dennis was going to say the same thing about the newsletter. Go ahead, can I? That's very generous of you. We're a little bit concerned about the aspirational nature of your photos, because I think the pensioners we're most concerned about having their, getting their full income from various sources, including us, will be the ones who are a bit on the edge, and to have such well-heeled people as the images, I think, is inappropriate. Seriously. It may just bring a wry smile to the faces of grandparents who don't sit and make model planes. We might be stuck in the playground waiting for the kids to come out and looking harassed. That's more likely in many ways. So I'm not saying that you want to have gloomy ones, but you might even be safer with jolly cartoons than those horribly library photo ones that you've used in that particular newsletter. Just a thought. If you look at them, I don't know what other members of the board feel. I actually think it's almost rude and a bit tone deaf to send that sort of thing out to somebody who's struggling.
Okay, can I take your point on social media first? So it's a good point about how to engage with people, but what we found with social media is you need to resource it up. So if you're going to engage with people on Facebook, people then do interact with you and you need to man it. And we haven't sort of felt as a pension fund that we have enough to sort of say on a sort of daily basis to actually man social media. It's something I think that the council can do, because they've got a variety of things that they might want to constantly talk about. But for pensions, we don't really have enough to say at regular intervals to sort of police, I suppose, and respond to people that are likely to do so perhaps on a daily basis. So that's kind of why we haven't sort of used much social media previously. We can piggyback on the back of the councils and perhaps try some things that way. But yeah, just to explain why we haven't.
I've never been on the council one, to be frank. So I think things which people feel they're in that group, the degree of policing needs to be made clear in the rules. If you've got a question, email, blah, that sort of thing.
Yes, but I think with social media, they're used to having an instant response. So I mean, that's the whole thing about social media, that it is immediate, and yeah. But
again, the oldies use Facebook in a different way, perhaps, to the younger people.
Yeah, and with response to the photographs, I don't know whether you've seen previous years, but they're not that far removed from previous years' photographs. But what I would say is that we don't pay for the photographs, so they are free downloads. So that does sort of limit our choice somewhat. And what we do find is, in terms of ethnicity in particular, there is less choice. I can see potentially, I think, unfortunately, I had to swap one out, and then you basically had two holiday ones back to back. So I can kind of see from that perspective that perhaps that might be a bit overkill on the whole holiday front, and perhaps we might rather have somebody gardening, for instance, which is a bit more of an everyday activity. But yeah, so they're not that it's not to say that what we've done in the past is right, and I'm open to sort of opinions, but yeah, just to give you a background, I suppose.
Harry, I'll come to you in a minute, if I may. Since you responded on that one, I mean, yes, perhaps we haven't commented, or I haven't commented on those photographs in the past, but I think the world has moved on. I am certainly more conscious, as I think we must all be, of the impending concerns for a whole stack of people over energy price increases and the like, and a number of other things. When I can't remember the precise figure, but my recollection is that the average pension we pay out is only in the sort of 6,000–7,000 a year range. You put that with a state pension of what, 10,000. People are not going to ever be going on holiday somewhere where there is a nice blue sea and an empty beach. And if the photographs are an issue, then perhaps we need to look at whatever those will cost. Personally, I was also very surprised by the content of that. I would really like to have a chance to be able to comment on that newsletter at a time when actually it is potentially possible to make changes. So that will be a next year issue, but just as a view. Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to make a comment. Really pleased to see that lots of joint communications with organisations like Unison, because I'm aware that they put a lot, because they're a national organisation, they put a lot of sort of time and effort into pensions related stuff. So I receive a lot of stuff. So it's probably a really good idea to make use of their resources. And also they can get them, okay, it doesn't go to everybody, but they can get a message out to probably a vast sort of majority of our members, because a lot of our members will be Unison members as well. So certainly I know I get, Mark will testify to this, I sometimes get pensions queries via Unison, which I then pass on to Mark, let's say. So yeah, it's a really good idea to make use of big organisations like that.
Thank you, Barry. More general, oh, Simon, you have a...
Thank you, Chair. Yes. First of all, I think we ought to just record our pleasure that that our engagement with communications compares favourably to industry benchmarks, which is obviously a positive in this report. I think there is always a problem engaging with people. You know, in my cynical experience as an elected councillor, people will engage when they're unhappy, but when they're not feeling strongly about something, they tend not to do that. And the fact, in a way, that people aren't engaging as much as we would like is probably good news, because that means that they're not particularly unhappy with what we're doing. I think just going back to the to the union comparison, I'm actually a member of Unite, and we get these ballots and newsletters and things, and you only need to see how few people actually vote in the ballots, of what is an important vote. And I suspect the same is true of Unison as well. A very low turnout for voters. So I think that we ought to do whatever is proportionate to increase engagement. But I do very much agree that we need to be careful not to spend too much money, because that's money we could be spending on something else. So I think it's a matter of being proportionate in how much we try and engage with people, because they will engage with us if they're unhappy. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Martin.
I was just going to say, we need to be a little bit careful assuming that people who aren't engaging with us are happy, on the basis that we've said here that our 1% response rate is actually good and well above everyone else's.
The conference last week, the message was very, the subject of engagement did come up, and yeah, I think the industry norm is, yeah, people don't. But I must say, putting the pensioner matters to one side, we're really pleased to see the report, and thank you for that. And I think the improvement activities are excellent. I think the particular one based on life stages, I've seen other people reporting work on that, which actually has a significant benefit of improving engagement. So that will be really good. Can I just note two very minor points, which I've told Mark. One of my concerns about this was the ISS response rates, was that a number of our employers have declared a climate emergency, whatever that may mean. And therefore I was really quite disappointed that they hadn't actually responded to the consultation. But for the record, of those 4 who did, 3 of them were prompted to do so either by board or committee members. And without that action, we would have got just 1 response from our employers. Yes, I mean, if our employers aren't engaged, we really have a problem. So it's good to see that actually they are engaged on other things. I do wonder whether that was a particular one-off, given that the report clearly shows that they do engage on other matters. Just probably a matter that the report didn't get, or that consultation didn't get to the right people in the organisations. But thank you for the report. I look forward to seeing how all those improvements perhaps get us to just over 1%. Now,
just following on from what you just mentioned, Dennis, about the review progress. Is this something that will come to the, sorry about that, is this something that will come to the committee, the board, going forward, say in Q4? And if so, can it be on the meeting planner, please?
So we plan to update it within the communications strategy and the communications plan. So you'll see it as part of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Are there any other questions on this matter? In which case, we've been asked to note the report. I believe we've done that. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for the report. Look forward to what further improvements and changes you can make over the coming year. Thank you for your time. Right, item 10, the business continuity plan. Joe, I believe this one is yours.
I believe I'm going to take this one whilst Joe sneezes.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think just so you're aware, we had a pre-meet with the chairman and probably came to the conclusion that bringing this to you was perhaps overkill. We'd committed to it, so if you've read every single word of the plan, then well done. That's probably going a bit above and beyond. All I'm going to say is just put it into context. We've obviously had a business continuity plan in existence ever since I can remember. As you're aware, the West Northamptonshire Council became the lead authority for the provision of pension services to the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund. West Northamptonshire Council has its own way of doing things, and they produced a new template, which actually was a significant improvement on what was there before. So what I've done, the main activities are clearly very, very similar to what was there before. So the critical activities, should I say. The bit that has changed the most from what previously existed was the scenarios around loss of personnel, loss of IT, loss of premise, etc. And so they've been fully developed out from what was there before. What we have done is, obviously, the pandemic provided significant learning opportunities, as actually did an outage of IT within Northamptonshire, which impacted the pension fund, which I think we flagged within some of our performance numbers over recent months. It was just for a couple of days, but it did give us some learning points again around, okay, are there ways we can make more things available even if we lose part of the system? And actually Microsoft Teams has been a godsend in terms of that. So really, we've developed it because we committed to bringing it to you. We've presented it, but obviously with the additional material that goes into it around contacts, etc., this is effectively now live. I believe we're pretty much the first service within Northamptonshire to produce a new template, so we will be sharing this with the corporate team as well, following us bringing it to yourselves. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions, which I can see there are.
Yeah, so me again. Yeah, I was rather taken aback when I got to this bit, because I sort of immediately I was thinking, where's the bunker? They're all going to, emergency. What all these klaxons going off? I thought, what are emergencies? And am I right in thinking that this is not being able to pay people their pensions?
Well, yes.
As well as being able to take the money in, particularly. Okay. And so we are recognizing here that for some people, when they get their pension, is of such immediate importance that we've got this very elaborate plan, which sort of looks, as I say, more like nuclear warfare in some ways. But that's what makes my point about some of our pensioners are actually in need of the support, not just of our reliability, and that is our key problem issue anyway, our responsibility, but also may well be needing help in other ways, because if the failure of our cheque to turn up in their bank account is going to be so crucial, we need this elaborate plan, day 1, day 2, day 3, we should be bearing that in mind, and maybe having access to the other sorts of advice, the life stages, maybe the benefits advice, that sort of stuff is crucial. So we do need to be really careful what communications we give, how we get them to people, and if they're not opening their emails, there's all sorts of reasons why people don't do that, as we know just from the crises of the COVID as counsellors. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
hello. I'm one of the probably sad people. I have read this. Sorry, guys. Can I just go through a few queries? First of all, page 152, your decision tree, it just seems all a bit messy, and I couldn't really follow it through.
Sorry, I should have said we've realised there has been some corruption on that. That's the the decision tree is the overall corporate decision tree, and which is just really showing how things hang together in terms of the various parts. Silver Manager, for example, how they've named them within Northamptonshire. Apologies, we did actually spot that had become corrupted, but and we will obviously get a proper version that is not in place.
Okay, another one is just for information. What on earth is a grab bag?
Sorry?
What is a grab bag? It's on page 154.
Yeah, this is really anything one of the questions around this plan is, where do you put it? Where do you put your contact information? I thought I'd taken that out actually, because I think there is a grab bag per se. All we need from a pension service perspective is for people to be clear exactly where this is and make sure it's accessible, even if we've got corporate systems failure. So sorry, the grab bag was some wording I did mean to remove, because it might be good job you did review it. Yeah, so some services might need something more physical than we actually do.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, I can ignore that in other words.
You can indeed, yeah.
Okay, 154, 156. Okay, page 156. There's a couple of things. Identify issues for escalation to the assistant director or equivalent. I just want, and also a similar thing, ensure costs are recorded, gain authorization for finance from emergency expenditure. I just wondered if you're having to activate the BCP, actually, how long does it take to get these things done, and whether there needs to be some sort of quick way around? I mean, particularly authorization of expenditure. I mean, is it not worth having like a contingency or something that you can go to without having to go and get the first bit authorized if you need some money?
Well, there was so when the COVID pandemic hit, there obviously was if you like, a budget related to that, which people could, so if they needed, so in effect, if they needed to incur additional expenditure due to COVID, then there was the quick ability to actually get that approved. So generally, I mean, we have slightly different controls in a sense, in that I can probably approve with going up the chain. So the AD who tends to get involved in pensions is the Deputy 151 officer. Delegated actually to Sarah Hayward, who you're aware of. So she kind of almost fulfills the AD Deputy Section 151 role for Cambridgeshire, and then there's Tom Kelly if it's in the Northamptonshire space. So this has to be then there are different names, obviously. I wouldn't like to give you the impression that this is over bureaucratic.
Okay.
Because it's not.
Okay, that's fine. That's probably what I was worried about. You know, it had to go through several committees or something to actually get the, say expenditure you needed.
No, very often it's just my boss is the Executive Director of Finance, Martin Henry, and I can have a conversation with him in a few moments over things if need be. So it's not overly bureaucratic.
Okay, I've got two more questions. Let me just. Okay, it's on page 163. You talked about point 5. If the ICT system failure is at a key supplier, e.g. Altair, liaise with supplier over disaster recovery process. I wonder if those are the right words, because surely when you actually procure the services of Altair, you would know what their disaster recovery process would be, and they would actually have that all written down, and it was all, I say planned, also tested, that sort of stuff. I just wonder if the wording's quite right there.
Well, to a point. Well, okay, so we know their process, but for example, we've had a situation where the Altair's hosted service has the ability to switch from one site to another if there is a disaster that requires that to take place, and there are prescribed timescales and what have you. But circumstances can intervene to mean that doesn't happen exactly how expected in terms of those timescales. So we do have to have that engagement and discussion. And I'm saying this from experience because we had a situation where an automatic switch didn't happen, and there had to be manual intervention, which took longer than the automatic switch would have taken, if that makes sense. So I think there is always the need probably to have those discussions. It might not be about, I guess, the theoretical process. It's almost about how is the process being implemented in reality.
Okay, and probably my last point was, you obviously alluded to the fact that some testing had been done as part of the sort of pandemic, and I could see where things like if the building wasn't available, then most of, everyone in pensions can actually work from home. So all that side of things, would be pretty easy to reconstruct again, I assume. Is there any plans to do any other testing?
We are looking, so tying it into the cyber work, we are looking to do potentially do some testing around there. So we obviously, in terms of the development of an incident response plan, and then there's obviously, we've got the ability to undertake a test. The reality, I think, here of this is that we have had loss of IT, we have had loss of personnel, and the old plan was completely tested. So I, as I think I've said in the business plan activities before, immediately before the lockdown, I had to review the previous version of the BCP and update it in light of pandemic. And the biggest changes were around, I previously would have said in the BCP, okay, if we can't come into the office within X days, we've got serious issues for certain areas of activity. The reality was, and what we've reached now, is that most activities can be undertaken remotely for a sustained period of time, as long as we've got a system. It's just very, very discrete activities that have to take place in the office, unless we procure other solutions, such as soft telephony, such as ability to handle post. And so that learning and testing, if you like, in the real world has fed into this version.
Okay, that's the end of my questions. Thank you very much.
Barry.
I think you may have answered this, Mark, or alluded to it, but my only point was that page 155 on the sort of checklist, call emergency services is like way down at number 10. And I just think if you have a situation, I don't know, people are injured in front of you, you're going through the other points before that, and I would consider it being way at the top. But I'm guessing this is more of a, in that sense, it would be more of a fluid checklist. You might decide to go straight to number 10.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality of these situations is that we are part of a larger whole that, I mean, obviously, if something originates within our service, well, I think that's very, very unlikely. The loss of personnel is going to be more likely to be a sort of a gradual build up over time, isn't it? The loss of IT, that will be an instant, but actually we'll find out probably from the corporate team as to exactly what's happened, and they would have called the emergency services. So it just, yeah, I mean, we have to recognise this for what it is, and it's part of a larger whole, actually. Is that okay, Barry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Martin.
Sorry, Mark, I just want to check. Is this this is the BCP? This is the continuity plan?
Yes. With some bits obviously taken out where they are, for example, the bits around contacts, etc. That's been obviously redacted from it.
And your feeling is that this is sufficiently detailed for you to be able to rehearse it? Because normally, in my experience, like, when 9/11 happened, we just went through the motions of what we've rehearsed every year. This doesn't appear, from my point of view, it doesn't appear to have the kind of detail where you'd be able to do that, to rehearse it.
It's more detailed than we've ever had. So it's a business continuity plan at the level of detail that I'm used to in the public sector. So I mean, it is the plan itself, to be clear. However, what I would say, Martin, is that we are obviously now going to share this with which we haven't done yet, with the West Northamptonshire team. I mean, we started work on it. So I was, I think, as you were aware from the business plan, I was chasing a template for a number of months, and then obviously received this. So we started working immediately on it, but I'm not aware of that every service is obviously undertaking this work. But we'll share it back with them, and any feedback on the level of detail, obviously we'll reflect on.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've been asked to review this plan, and as Mark has clearly identified, in essence, it has been reviewed and tested as both in terms of the pandemic response and the IT outage. So I believe we have actually successfully reviewed that, as has the team itself. So thank you. I will now move on. Mark, we now have the investment strategy statement, which I believe you're presenting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So it's a bit of a feedback loop there. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so this is obviously after it. This is a post-publication review of the strategy. The main reason for the change in investment strategy was obviously to do with responsible investment and the work coming out of there. Obviously, we're in public session. It's right that this comes to you in public session because it obviously has been now put into the public domain anyway. I will be obviously guarded with regards to any comments I make about the direction of travel, particularly because the investment subcommittee needs to make decisions. They are the decision makers with regards to tactical allocations to investment. So I'll be guarded in those comments as to what I can say in the public domain. As you're aware, the main sections of this which were updated, and I believe they were updated following your feedback for those that did attend the virtual session when we talked through this area. In particular, I think a number of you were keen that for Cambridgeshire a net zero commitment was made. That did make its way into the final version of the strategy. So it's to achieve net zero by 2050 or earlier. And what I can say on that point is that one of the decisions the investment subcommittee will need to make is the transition pathway they wish to follow. So we are obviously giving them options which enable them to meet that net zero commitment by 2050. And from what we are seeing, it looks like there is almost like a decision point around 2030 as to whether you wish to accelerate to have an earlier net zero commitment. So up until then, the pathway, whilst there are a number of different, if you like, gradients to the pathway, one pathway in particular, which looks like it's probably the most sensible one for the Cambridgeshire committee to follow, does diverge at that point, and it could be sped up if need be. But the commitment is there, which I think is the important point. What this means for the Cambridgeshire Fund is a decarbonisation plan to deliver that net zero commitment. That means looking at both listed and passive assets. The area that obviously probably needs the most close looking at is passive, because we've done very little in that space. The active assets, it's about engaging with those active managers. We will be agreeing very specific targets with regards to carbon footprint and carbon intensity, how they are to reduce. We'll be reporting on a climate dashboard the current position and also against those targets. There will be review points at various points as we go down the timeline as well. And the other big area, I think it's probably fair to say that it is going to be significant changes around the stewardship. And that's through the reporting and through the voting, and particularly the transparency around that and the amount we put out there with, so members can understand exactly what we're doing and employers. And to that end, there are two initiatives. One is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, which you will no doubt have heard of before. We are looking to probably publish ahead of the statutory requirement to do so, because we've done most of the work actually already to have that information available. And the second thing is around the stewardship code, which again has been on the around the business plan for a period of time. We will look to become a signatory. We have prioritised the decarbonisation planning work. And sorry, I should have said, all of this is in an action plan, which again will be going with the permission of the committee into the public domain. And the timeline for that, sorry, Dennis, is February. So the action plan will be put before the investment subcommittee in February.
Thank you very much, Mark. Are there any questions for Mark? Barry?
Just a typo I spotted. Page 184, 2.6. Unless we've got a time machine, it says it was presented to the PFC on the 15th of December 2022. I'm assuming it means 2021.
Yes, thank you.
Martin?
Thanks. From the training we received in previous board meetings, it was made very clear that we can't, I'm talking we being much broader than just the pension fund board, but broadly, we can't just suddenly decide that we will not invest in any oil companies, say, for example. You can't make decisions like that unless it has no material impact on the returns for the members, for the pension fund itself. So essentially, our obligation is to ensure that the pension fund is sufficient to pay the pensions. So my question really is just in relation to that constantly, that level of materiality question, which is going to come up constantly as you move through a decarbonisation type strategy. Is your approach going to be proactive in the sense that I don't mind whether it's proactive or reactive, just curious, but proactive in the sense of saying, you must tell us in advance how material to the value of the fund this move in the strategy is going to be? Or is it going to be more reactive where every time we take a step, we'll ask that question? So will we be asking the investment manager to kind of lay out as the strategy goes forward that and assure that each of those steps is not going to have a material impact on the valuation? Or are we going to just ask it as we do each step? I'm just curious to know which one we're going to do.
So it will primarily be understanding the impacts in advance. So if you're talking about us making a conscious decision, and to be clear that no decisions have been made whatsoever, but the reality is for every fund in the country, if you want to decarbonise, it's probably a mixture of moving assets as well as working with existing managers to and this is probably where your point most comes in, to understand if a particular action is taken, what will be the impact in terms of the diversity of the portfolio, the returns. Are you still going to have the same weightings to each sector, to each region, for example, and what will be the impacts on those who, are whether it's those companies on communities or individuals, all those sorts of things. So and the way you could do that, for example, is with an active manager. You could set a carbon budget and say, okay, if we were to say, could your mandate be 25% below the benchmark? What would the impact be? That's a way you could do it. There are many others. The other side is, of course, is that if you're taking a conscious decision that you want to move assets into a particular type of thing, you would understand in advance what the impacts would be compared to your existing portfolio. But ultimately, I think it's fair to say there are so many, obviously, relationships, mandates, and individual underlying companies. Part of what we definitely need to happen is for some of our existing managers to make their portfolios more sustainable. So if you like, they're moving in a very, very controlled way from what there is there at the moment to something slightly different, with that slightly different being something which is sustainable for the long term. The whole reason we're doing this is because we understand that targeting 1.5, 2 degrees ends in a better result for everybody, including our fund, than a 4-degree scenario, where it would just be utterly disastrous, both obviously for society, for the environment, and for the pension fund.
Thanks, that's helpful. Cheers.
All right.
I was just picking up on Martin's point. So Martin was talking about the material factors, basically decarbonising the portfolio. But obviously, I was just really highlighting part of our fiduciary duty will include non-material factors. So what Mark was talking about, yes, you could carry on investing in something, I don't know, such as oil, and you might get good returns, but if it ultimately leads to there being no planet, then yeah, there's no point in doing that. So we have to be sort of conscious of the non-material factors as well as part of our fiduciary duty.
Yeah, we would. So when we look at things, we obviously you look at financial and non-financial factors, and the non-financial include environmental, social, societal, and governance factors, and a lot of those can now obviously interlink more so than ever. Obviously, the reason we're doing this is to control the carbon and climate risk in the portfolio. Because the primary responsibility is the primary fiduciary responsibility is to the scheme members. And by controlling those risks, that's how we can best do that. I would say, obviously, there's a variety of views in every room around the issue of divestment, wholesale divestment of a sector or region. And if you use fossil fuels as an example, I guess it's one interesting fact would be, if we were to exclude fossil fuels, we would have a higher carbon footprint as a result. And the reason for that is because what you need to add back in to get the same diversification of return tends to have a higher carbon footprint than a fossil fuel company. And that's actually borne out by modelling and the science. So that's an interesting point. So actually being fossil free would to some extent harm our ability to hit the net zero 2050 target. Aside from that, I think if you're signed up to the just transition, then if you just flicking a switch and divesting from oil, and particularly gas, when every household in the UK requires, or 40 million households, I think it is, require gas central heating, is a difficult conversation. But I won't dwell on those because everyone, as I say, will have a different view.
Mark, might I just ask? I think I'm maybe the last one here. What I see is out in the press or media or whatever, it is an increasing number of pension funds making decisions around this arena. The university superannuation scheme has just announced something. There was one of the big Dutch pension funds that got out of shell, if my memory is correct. I think the question I got is our approach going to be defensible when we are constantly going to be compared with the decisions of other schemes and funds?
Well, I mean, obviously, what we have produced is a very sophisticated response, I guess, to a really complex problem. And I'm aware of, through our advisors, of certain funds who have a number of years ago gone for a divestment approach who are now looking to reverse that because of the very issue I just mentioned around it actually hinders your ability to decarbonize portfolios if you do that. I don't know. I mean, obviously, who knows what will come out of any sort of national guidance. Who knows what pressures will come locally and what the reaction to those pressures will be. All I can say is that we have thoroughly considered the problem and have come up with a solution which we think is right. And certainly, in terms of going back to the consultation, there was more people who said directly, please don't do anything that affects my pension and don't incorporate these things into your policy than there were who said, please do more. So, the numbers were very, very low, but there wasn't a groundswell that we're pushing for one thing. Well, as I say, what we've done is what we think is appropriate for the portfolio. And I guess, on your shell point, I know investment managers who have deselected shell and others who have retained shell, and each have justified their rationale for doing so. And in many ways, if they are they're experts and are spending lots of time on an individual stock like that, I think they are in the best position to decide whether it's appropriate to hold or divest.
Your point is valid. My question was merely that what is hitting the press is decisions by funds to make significant change, and that is going to quite potentially lead to more people turning up and asking questions. That was where I was coming from. Councillor Slatter.
Yes, on that theme, just amongst this group, but I understand we are public as well. I am relatively new to this discussion, other than in just general terms as a citizen. And for me, the duty to look after the pensions of people who are dependent on us is important. And also as a politician, it's also useful to stay in a group you want to influence the behaviour of. So I may well need to amend my views as I learn more, but I certainly, going back to what Mark has said, if we have got people reinvesting, that's very interesting, but I'd also like to feel that we could have some feedback in terms of where has the substantial investment power of this group had an effect on the policy of some of those organisations we seek to influence and to essentially influence for change and improvement, in our view, which obviously is a long game that we play. And I don't want to be reckless and do things in a hurry. Even if there are other people doing something different, I think we need to know that we are, we know we're going, at the moment I'm happy with what has been said by the investment strategy, and the pension committee, and I'll be continuing to discuss with them. I think probably this afternoon as well.
Yeah, Heidi, if I could make a final comment, I think one of the one of the interesting things is one of the public questions was around, mentioned a company called Orsted, who one of our active investment managers has invested for many years. When they were a coal, they were a coal energy company. They're now a green utility. And the principal point is, if we had a divestment approach, we could not have been in that company, and they wouldn't, and that might have influenced their ability to even make a transition if everybody had the same view. But they are now seen as a shining beacon, and indeed were mentioned in one of the public questions. And in a nutshell, that's the ideal situation. The investment manager, to be clear, because we are paying them quite a bit of money to undertake these activities. They're engaging with that company and trying to put them on the appropriate pathway. That's an example of where it worked. If it didn't, then ultimately we'd probably expect them to deselect them.
All right, final question.
Yeah, it's just to jump in on that point Mark was making. So in my own head, I've been sort of tussling with divestment versus engagement. But actually at the conference last week, I had the chair sit down with me and he put it in kind of simple terms. So this is Councillor Roger Phillips. He just said, basically, it's the oil and gas companies are the ones that have the expertise and the money in energy delivery. If you just simply divest, you don't get to influence their transition into more greener energy supply. So he put it just as simply in that statement. So they've got the money and they've got decades of expertise. And if you just simply not invest with them anymore, you don't get to have a say on how fast they transition. So that's my only point.
Thank you, Barry. I
think it's a hand from Councillor King as well. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mark. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to say I very much agree with what Barry has said. And I think this is a dilemma that some people are not fully aware of, that in order to influence change, we have to engage, however uncomfortable that is sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I think members of political parties are well aware of this. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your time on this one, which has been through investment subcommittee. We've been asked to note the report. I hope that's been adequately done. We're now moving on to some items for which it is necessary to exclude the press and public. Believe we have no members of the press and public here, but just to confirm that we resolve that the press and public be excluded for the meeting on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under paragraphs 1 and 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A on page 1 of 326 of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. And it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed in discussion, as it contains information relating to an individual and the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. So, that being the case, I assume that we approve that resolution by affirmation. No objections, so that resolution is approved.
Agreed, Chair.